Hey everyone, it is time for another recitation, this time about routing with Express. And you'll see in the recording, hey, I got a green screen. It's not very good yet. I don't have the lighting set up well, but it's pretty neat. Okay, so our project for today is to build a REST API with Express that takes advantage of routing. And I've already got my application set up. I did yarn install, and I also added Express to the project as it's not originally in the dependencies. And at this point, I should be good to get going. So in the root of my project, I have nothing really that I've done yet. So we're going to have to create a file called index.js. And this is where our application is going to start. I'm going to require Express to get it going. And we saw in lecture today, you can absolutely, do this inside of a server.js file and then import it into index.js, or rather require it. I'm just going to skip that step and do it within here. But there's no problem doing it inside of another file. So I'm going to declare my server as being an Express. I'm going to add my my JSON middleware, which you all learned about middleware. This is basically a function that's going to sit in between receiving the request and me actually processing those endpoints and parse the body into a JavaScript object for us, which is very nice. So server.use, and I'm going to give it express.json, which is a function that I need to call. Now I can do server.listen on port, let's do 4444, console log, server on 4444. So now that I have this, let's try to do yarn serve, or yarn server. Yes, there we go. Okay, so now I have nodemon going. It's watching my index.js, and we have our server started. So at this point, I want to create my routes. So in the root of my directory, there's a lot of ways to structure this. In fact, there's infinite ways, or at least non-countable ways. So you can create a folder called routes and then create subfolders in there. You can create JavaScript files straight in the root. You can create folders straight in the root that map to the routes. Try different things on different projects and use what you like. These kind of organizational methods don't have really fast and true best practices because it's going to depend on the project, and it's also going to depend on your preference. So I'm going to create a file called posts. I'm sorry, a directory called posts, and that's where my posts router is going to live. So I'm going to create a file inside of posts called posts router, and in here I'm going to require Express, and I'm going to create a router. And I do that by calling express.router with a capital R, and then I'm going to export this. Module.exports is going to equal router. And now I can use this to write any routes that I want. Instead of doing server.get post put delete, I do router.get post put delete. So I'm going to do router.get, and I'm just going to use this root level slash. I'm going to get my request and response object, and we're just going to test and see if this works. It's very important as we're exploring these new topics to constantly try to test your understanding to see if I do this, does it work the way that I think? It's going to be so valuable as you're trying to solve these problems. Try to break it down into the smallest manageable chunk that you think you understand, and then verify your understanding. So the idea of the router is that I can write routes inside of it. So I'm going to write one. I'm going to put it at the simplest possible path that I can, just this slash, and I'm going to have it send a response that says working. Then inside of my index.js or your server.js, wherever you've chosen to include your to create your server, I'm going to import my router. So this is going to be post router, and I'm going to require via a relative path /posts / postrouter.js. And now I can add this to my server. And notice that I do server.use, right? Just like I apply my Express JSON middleware, right? I'm going to do server.use postrouter. And that's because there's really not too much difference between our routes and our middleware. We're just not taking this next argument. We have no interest in passing our request on. We want to stop it here. So that's what our middleware really is. Or I'm sorry, that's what our routes really are. Is they're just a kind of middleware, but they're endware instead of being in the middle. And I also have to specify as the first argument to this the route that I want to prepend all of the routes inside of my posts router. So I have this, it's /, and I want this to be treated as /API/posts. So this is going to end up effectively being /API/posts, along with any other route that I write inside of this file. Okay, let's, I'm going to get my terminal real small at the bottom here, just so I can check and see if I'm making any errors as we go through. That looks good. I have Insomnia running. I'm going to create a GET request. So get posts, and this is going to go to localhost 4444/API/posts. Hey, there we go. It's working. It's working. So routes do work the way that I think that they do. So now we have to start trying to hit our MVP objectives, which are laid out very clearly in here. You all should be very, very nice to Luis, because this is incredibly clear about all your responsibilities and all the cases that you need to handle. And it can be very easy to forget to handle, certain cases of invalid data or certain types of errors. So thank you, Luis. I'm going to start with my GET requests because that allows me to do the least amount of work before I start seeing results, and that's how I like to operate. I like to see results quick so I know if I'm wrong. So I'm actually going to write out this GET request to API/posts, and we want to return all the posts in our database, and if we have some error in that, we want to return a HTTP status code of 500. Right, 500 errors mean the server goofed up. 400 errors means the client, the requesting person, goofed up. And return some object. So I realize I forgot to mute people, and I'm going to do that right now. So let's do this. We have all of our database functions defined for us inside of db.js, inside of our data folder. So I'm going to go ahead and import that. Const db is going to equal to require. I need to go up a level. Since I am inside of the posts directory, I need to go up one level into the root, and then down into data, and then grab db.js. So /data/db.js. And we'll see in the project today that as we end up with multiple different types of resources, like posts and comments and users and books and whatever, we'll tend to import the functions relevant to those under a name like posts so that we can operate on those specifically. Here we still just have this general file. So I now have my database functions. Let's try to use find, which should return a promise that resolves to an array of all the posts contained in the database. Awesome. So let's do db.find. We'll chain a then on here, and we'll get the posts, and we'll do res.status of 200, a successful code, and then we'll supply as JSON the array of posts. In the case that this fails, I'm going to catch my error. I'm going to console log the error. I saw so many times yesterday people being like, this request is 500, and they're not console logging the error. So like they see the 500, but they have no idea what's causing it. You can know. If you console log the error, it will tell you what the error was that triggered this. If it was, something in the database, this can catch syntax errors inside of your .then. It's very important to console log this error so that you know what is happening and what triggered that error. And then we're going to give our status code of 500. We goofed up, and we're supplying as JSON this object that Luis told us to supply, which I'll do this one correctly. I'm going to be kind of writing short error messages as we go forward, just because it takes time, and I'll drop that down there. All right, so we should be able to make requests here and get our posts. So let's see if that works. I make my get request. Oop, it didn't like this. Cannot set headers after they've been, oh, okay. So I did something a bit wrong yesterday that I'm going to touch on today as soon as we get to validation. But whenever you see this error, cannot set headers after they are sent to the client, that's because you've already sent a response back, and now you're trying to send another one. And the reason it's saying set headers is because the first thing we want to do is try to set the response code. So it's getting mad, right? Because we can only send one response, and we've already done that. So I no longer need my res.send. Okay, now let's try making our get request. There we go. We are successful. We have received all of the posts, and there we go. There is our get route. All right, do we have any questions at this point? Okay, we'll keep moving forward. So now that I have my first get done, I want to do my second get, because again, that's usually a smaller amount of work, and I like seeing my results come in. So I'm going to do a router.get, and this time we're going to be at /:id, because remember, this is going to resolve to /API/posts/:id. So this is going to allow us to get a specific post. I'm going to get my rec and my res, and we're going to consult our table of database functions. Now, this is something that gave people a lot of trouble, and this is why it's important to understand the code we are using, even if we don't understand the implementation, right? So here we're going to use the, where is this? The find by ID function, which accepts an ID as its only parameter, and then returns the post corresponding to the ID or an empty array if no post with that ID is found. That's different than yesterday. Yesterday either returned the object that was found or it returned null. It didn't return this whole array thing. So let's perform db.findById, and we're going to need our ID, which I like to destructure out of rec.params. You could also set ID directly equal to rec.params.id, but I like my destructuring. And then we're going to call db.findById, and we're going to give it the ID as an argument. Then I'm going to get this post, and I'm going to console log the post. We'll do this inside of a body, so we can also send the request back. And let's also do res.status of 200, and let's do this so we can send the post back as JSON as well. So let's see what happens when I go ahead and make the request. Let me duplicate you. Get post singular. Oh, my Insomnia didn't like that. I think I just crashed Insomnia. Let's start that up again. But the idea behind this is that the post here is going to be wrapped in this array. And I'll talk about why that's the case, and you'll see that frequently, and you'll forget the specific case that both causes and handles that a lot. But it's good to see this right now. So let's rename this to get post. Oh, it doesn't like the dragging. That is crashing Insomnia. So let's start this up again. The joys of doing this live. Okay. There we go. I'll just do it that way. Mice are evil. Okay. So now I want to get the first post. And I'm going to make this request, and it's successful. I see my post object here. I see it in my console as well. But it's wrapped inside of this array. And I can go ahead and try to request a post that doesn't exist, and we'll see that I now get this empty array. So yesterday we were able to do something like, if the post exists, then we're going to send back the post. Otherwise, we are going to give a status code of 404 and then an error message, something along the lines of, you know, post with ID does not exist. Does someone have a question? I just heard some heavy breathing into a microphone. Okay. Let me finish this out and then I'll take questions real fast. So this isn't going to work here, right? If I try to get this post that doesn't exist, we still get a successful response. We still get this 200 because we're checking if post is truthy. And an empty array is a truthy value, right? Our falsy values are false, null, undefined, 0. An empty array is not falsy. So one possible fix for this is to check if post.length. Because for the empty array, that is, the length is going to be 0, and that's a falsy value. So this will work. There we get our 404. Post with ID does not exist. But I don't like returning the post inside the array when we're successful here. Another thing we could do is have this be some other argument name, and then I can save the post as the first element of the posts array. So now we're just dealing with the single object. And if I try to get the 0th element of an empty array, I'm going to get undefined. So we can see when I make this request here, we get our 404, and when we check our console, right, we see that post is undefined. The 0th element of an empty array is undefined. All elements of an empty array are undefined. I could also write this, instead of using the array index accessor, I could do this with the structuring. I could put some square brackets around post, and that will destructure the first element of posts into the variable post. And so that code is functionally equivalent. Right? I can get a post that does exist, and that's successful, and now we just get this object. We don't get the array that comes with it. Right? And because I'm doing destructuring, I can do this inside of this argument here. So whenever we use destructuring inside of an argument list for an arrow function, it needs to be wrapped in parentheses. And now I can just do my destructuring inline. I want to destructure the first element of the array supplied as an argument into a variable called post. And so this works. And this is, in my opinion, the cleanest way to handle this situation without going out and fixing it yourself, which I want to show what causes this. So I'm going to go up into data and inside of db.js, and we'll understand more about this when we get to next week and we write these database functions ourselves. But we can kind of read this as is and reason about how it works. So we're getting all the posts from our database, and then we're returning all the posts where the ID is equal to the ID that was supplied as an argument. Now, we as people know that the ID in our database is unique. We only expect one post to match. But I don't have to check the ID here. I could check the post text to, be empty. Maybe we want to find all the posts with no text in them. We can search for whatever we want in here. And so this is set up to return an array of results because we don't know how many elements are going to match this where. So it by default returns an array. We can fix this if we're only expecting a single result by adding .first onto the end of here. in doing this, I no longer need to destructure post because it will be the same as yesterday, where, oh, I did this on find by ID. Oh, I forgot to save the file. It's the same as yesterday. Post is going to be this object if it does exist, and it will be undefined if it does not exist. I guess post 5 is defined. There we go. That one's not defined. There we get our 404. Alright, so you can add this dot first to the database function, or we can do the destructuring in here. For today, I'm not going to mess with the database files other than just letting you know what caused that discrepancy, and you're going to forget the dot firsts a significant amount of time, so it's good to know how to handle them on the non-database end of things. So at this point, do we have any questions?
Could you explain the significance of why you don't want to return an array with an object inside it versus returning just an object?
Because it's a little bit annoying for the person consuming the data. Right? If they're expecting to receive a single post and they get that inside of an array, well, then they have to, get the post out of the array. They have no use for the array. It's just kind of there as a box. So we might as well take it out for them.
Okay, so that'd make the front end when doing a build week appreciative of your work in the back. Got it.
And especially because it's easy to forget these dot firsts. And in the build week group that I was the product manager for, there was some inconsistency between different endpoints, whether the object would be wrapped in an array or not, and that can make it a pain. Sometimes two endpoints that are supposed to be returning the same data do, but one of them's in an array, so it's just easier to return only the data structure that we really expect here. So that is my preference. All right. Any other questions at this point?
Could you explain that destructuring using brackets and why you had to change the database thing again?
So the value of post, the value of the argument supplied to this dot then, today, is an array. It's an array that contains all of the items that have this ID, which we know is only one. And this is the default behavior of doing this db.where. So I could just get this post, which is inside of this array, and we'll see when I request a post that does exist, we get the post object that matches that ID, and it's inside of this array, which is, as I said, a little bit annoying to deal with on the front end, but it's not a deal breaker. It doesn't do anything that is inherently problematic to our code. But look what happens when I try to get a post that doesn't exist. We send a successful response back instead of a 404, and they receive this empty array. And that's because of this if statement, right? What I want to do is I want to check if this post exists. And in the case that it does exist, I want to send the successful response. And if we don't have a post that matches that ID, then I want to send an unsuccessful response. I want to send a 404 back. But this post is either an array with an object inside of it, or it's an empty array. Both of these values are treated as true. So our if statement doesn't work. And there's a couple ways around this. We can check if the post.length is not equal to 0. Right? In that case, we know that there is a post that matches that ID. And in fact, I can leave out this equals because if the length is 0, that's a falsy value. If the length is any number that isn't 0, that's going to be a truthy value. So this will work. Now I'm going to receive my 404 because we're checking if the length of the post is 0 or 1. And I can get the post as well, and we see it here, but it is wrapped inside of this array, and that array is not necessary, and that's just creating a little bit of friction for whoever consumes the API to deal with unwrapping that array and grabbing the object inside of it. So I would like to be a kind developer, so I'm going to do that for them, which we can do by getting the first element out of the array being passed as an argument, which we can do in many ways. We can do it with the index accessor, We can also do it with destructuring, which is my preference here, because we know that the argument being supplied here is an array, so I want to get the first element out of that array and store it in my post variable. Now I don't need to check the length, because if the post was in the array, it's going to be equal to that object, which is a truthy value. If the array was empty, then post is going to be undefined, because there is no first element to destructure from that array. So now my if statement works in the way that I expect it to, and the person consuming my API receives the single post object when they request it, which is my preference in terms of how I would want them to be able to interact with the API. I don't want them to have to do any processing of the data that I'm sending back, when I can easily do that before I send it to them. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. And the dot first was, we can prevent this function from returning the array with all the matches. If we only expect there to be 1 or 0 matches, this dot first here will have it either return the object that matches or undefined. So either way works, but I'm gonna do this one for now. Okay. Any other questions here?
Yeah, Henry. So if you're returning, and what does it return if it's not an object? If there's no objects being returned, is it returning undefined?
So, what do you mean by returning? Do you mean find by ID?
For find by ID, it returns an empty array if there's no objects.
Yes.
But if there's no objects, what is the default value if there's no object being returned?
If there's no object found by, if there's no matching objects found by this db.where, then it returns an empty array. Right, and that was the case that we had to handle in order to get our else branch to work. We could check the length of the array, or we can destructure this. And in the case that the argument isn't, or I'm sorry, yes?
Yeah, but if you add the dot first, then what is it going to return if there's no?
Yeah, it returns undefined. That's how it worked in the previous day's project. It returns undefined. It's basically doing this, right? It's doing that, except this is a promise and we can't do it like this, and technically dot first allows you to continue chaining certain types of query building stuff on the end of it. But yeah, that's all that dot first is really doing for us, but in promise form. All right, any other questions here? Okay, we got to get cooking because we're almost at time here, and we have a lot of things left to do. So let's go ahead. Let's just go down this list, and let's get our post working. So I am going to do my router.post. This is going to be at the root level. Going to accept the request and the response objects, and then I am going to get. Let's see, what are the items we expect from the post body? That should be title and contents. So I'm going to destructure that from my request body. And then I'm going to check if they exist. So if there is no title or there is no contents, then I want to send back this 400 bad response. Now, we can do that by doing res.status 400.json, and then we'll give it an error message, need title and contents. That's not what we're supposed to put there, but I'm going quick. And then we can continue on our merry way handling the case where these were not defined, or where they were defined. And this was a mistake that I had made when I did yesterday's project, which I actually fixed, and now in the Git repository is the corrected code. But res.status, calling that doesn't stop our code from running. It's going to keep going. So if I do my db.insert, and I'm going to give it an object that contains the title and the contents, and then I'm going to chain my .then off here, and I'm going to get what is this going to return? It's going to return the ID. And then for now, I'll just return res.status200, and I'll give the ID back as JSON. Let's look and see what happens. So I'm going to send a post request to the posts endpoint. Let's duplicate this. Posts. And then I will post the posts endpoint. I think Luis did this on purpose to make me sound silly. And then I'm just going to give it a title. I'm not going to give it contents. Okay. So now when I post, boom, bang, got my 400 error. That's correct. I handled it correctly, right? Everything's good in this world. I've made no mistakes. Not even close. What's up? I get this error from my SQLite. Well, that's weird. I thought that I had already handled this case and I was done here. The problem is, after we do this res.status, our code keeps running. We're going to do this db.insert anyway. There's two ways that I can handle this. Well, more than two, but I'm going to show you two. I can return this. And it doesn't matter that I return the res.status. I could just return null on the next line. But the idea is return shortcuts our function. It stops there and it doesn't continue running code. So this allows me to stop after I've done the 400 status, and now we're not going to receive this SQLite error. We're not going to try to insert this incorrect thing into the database because we stopped running our code when we executed the return. Alternatively, we could put our db.insert inside of an else branch so that only in the case that this was false do we perform the db.insert. And both are good. If you have, a lot of these kind of else branches, you can end up nesting your code somewhat laterally, and that can get messy to read. In the JavaScript community, from what I've seen, people prefer doing an early return when you have certain types of malformed content like this. So I would do this return style unless you find someone who tells you about it otherwise. So Elvis asked about, what about res.end? So res.end is one way of handling the request, right? We have to send a response to the person making the request in order for them to know that the request has been processed. Res.end is just a way to send back essentially nothing and be like, you're not getting anything. This is over. That still doesn't stop our code from running. It ends the request, but we still get to do whatever we want inside of this function. So we would still need a return or an else branch. All right. Any questions with this? Okay. So now we're doing our insert, and this is going to give us back some stuff. If we look inside of this insert thing here, it's inserting our posts into the database. Then it's getting an array of IDs, because insert can insert multiple things at one time. And then we're extracting the ID and putting it inside of this object. So if I do this correctly, we can see what the result of that is. Content. This is content. Why doesn't it like that? Oh, it's because I forgot my double quotes. Formatting JSON is hard. Okay. Contents. There we go. All right, so that one's successful. We see that ID, this argument I've decided to call ID, is actually an object that contains the key ID that has a value of the ID of our newly inserted post. So instead of doing this, we can call this ID object, right? And we can get the value of the ID as ID object.id. This is messy. I don't like it. Can anyone guess what I'm about to suggest? It's destructuring. What's up? So I know that ID is an object, and it contains a key ID that contains the information that I want. So going to wrap my argument list in parentheses, and I'm going to destructure ID out of that object. There we go. Now I have my integer ID inside of a variable called ID. And from here, we want to go ahead and get a value from the database so we can return to the user this newly created post. So this is where we would perform another database interaction. We do db.findById, and we'd give it this ID as an argument. Then we would go ahead and we'd get our post, and I'm going to do the destructuring here. And I am going to do res.status 200.json and give them the posts. This should be a 201 because we created some stuff for them. And there we go. So these are all of our positive cases. So with the negative case of they didn't give us the right data, then we insert it into the database. We're going to get this ID by destructuring. We're going to find the post with that ID, and then we are going to return that post back to them. So let's check and see if that works. Perfect. So perfect. So perfect. But we're not handling all of the negative cases here. So whenever we have a dot then, we're going to need a dot catch that returns a status code of 500, right? Because if whatever we're doing with our database fails, that's going to throw an error that's going to get caught by our dot catch, and we need to handle that and tell the user that, like, hey, you didn't do anything wrong necessarily, but we were not able to handle your request. So for this insert, we have our dot then. I want the dot catch to handle this case. So I'm going to get the error. I'm going to console log my error so I know what went wrong. And then I'm going to tell the user that something went wrong. Res.status 500.json error error inserting post. Right, so this is going to give me information. Let's say I wrote this if statement wrong and I put an and here. So this is only going to trigger in the case that title and contents are missing. So when we have one missing, if we just have contents missing, right, we get this 500 error because the database is going to fail to insert that. It needs the contents. But now I see this error in my console. Unhandled rejection error, SQLite constraints, if I scroll down, this is the console logged version of the error. I see SQLite constraint, not null constraint failed. Post.contents. Right. I don't have to know what all of those words mean, but it's telling me something about post.contents. I've not sent post.contents. I'm not checking this correctly. So console logging these errors gives you information that helps you solve problems. We also want to put a dot catch here when we try to find the post inside of our database, because that could go wrong. So I'm going to get my error, I'm going to console log it, and then I'm going to send back res.status of 500 JSON error getting posts. So now the user knows if that case was handled correctly. If I didn't have this dot catch here, when the error is thrown by this db.findId, it would get caught by this outer catch. And it would get handled by this, and it would tell the user that there was an error inserting the post, and that's not entirely correct. We were successful in inserting the post. We were unsuccessful in retrieving that post. So having each catch for each database interaction is valuable because it tells our user where things went wrong. We could even return the ID of the post that we had created, right? Because we know that that was successful. So we can tell them, hey, you can try going and getting your post you created by some other means. We just failed getting it for you at this point. So good error messages result in good APIs. And if I see...
Can you go back up to the top of that code block real quick?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. And so, good error messages, good APIs. If I see this specifically in anyone's code, and a TL asks you why you wrote that, and you can't explain it, oh boy, am I going to be disappointed in you. Do not copy this. Don't copy this, right? You should already be done with your projects from yesterday. If you're still catching up on your understanding, fine, but do not use this as a resource for you to complete those underhandedly. I'll stop. Oh, no, I'm not talking to you specifically, Tommy. I just meant to kind of address people in general, because again, I heard that a small set of students are kind of just waiting until today to do their project from yesterday. And if you do that, I will stop doing this. I have no reservations about stopping at the drop of a hat if I don't think people are getting out of this what they should be. So that is kind of this is my paper street. Map makers would put in fictitious roads so that if someone copied their map, they could see that they copied the road that didn't exist and then sue them. And if you do this, oh boy.
That's clever.
Okay. So we're doing all of this. We're catching these errors. Notice that I don't have an if statement in here for if this post doesn't exist. We could handle that. We don't necessarily need to be exhaustive here because we just created the post. It probably exists. Technically, there's a window in which that post could be deleted before we return it here. Something that we could do is, because really what I'm doing is, if I go and find my GET request here, I'm essentially copying and pasting this code to handle this. So I could write this into a function, right? I could write a function and call it get post, and that's going to take an ID, and then that's going to do this, right? And I'll return it so they can have access to this, and then I can call get post with my ID in here, and now I can do that additionally in here. This is what we meant when we were talking about lazy developers. There we go. And now I can do get post and give it the ID. Right? I want this functionality in two places, so I can put it inside of a function. And I realize that I do not have my .catch on here, so I should add one. And I can say, get my error. I can console log the error. I can return res.status of 500, and I can give JSON error getting post, and then I can give the ID.
So Henry, the reason why you're adding the ID is just like for kind of like information or feedback to the user.
Yep, I was just thinking if I was using this API, that would be useful for me to know. I'm making the request, so I should know what that ID is when performing this GET request. But when we're actually getting the newly created post out of the database, it would be useful for me to know what the ID of the post I supposedly created was, and we were unable to get. So we can also see, right, using functions, it not only allows us to reuse our code, reuse our logic, but it also makes this read a little bit easier. Right? We were starting to nest thens and catches, and it was getting a little bit confusing as to what belonged where. Now, this just says get post, and we give it the ID. Right? That's all it says. And I can go and find get post and read it, and this is a bit clearer on what it does in isolation, right? We're trying to find the post by ID. If we find it, we return it. We can return a 404, we can return a 500. but when I'm reading my code, I get this nice name, get post. I know exactly what we're doing, right? This is all that this endpoint is just getting this ID out of here and getting our post. So using these functions is very valuable, both to the reusability of our code, but also to the readability of our code. So that's one way we can handle this without having to rewrite all of those error messages ourselves. So let's keep going. Now I am going to implement. We're kind of running out of time here, and I don't want to go too long. Let's update. We want to do an update. We want to do the put here. Okay, we can
and
do
also
that.
the add
Yeah, I want to get to the
comments.
comment stuff. Let's do the post real fast. And then we'll move on to comments, right? So I'm sorry, I put real fast. So here we're also going to do it on a specific post. It's some ID. We get our rec and our res. We're going to get our ID out of rec.params. Okay, and so now our goal is to do very similar things to our post. I want to get my title and contents. I'm going to check and see if we have any updates, and then I'm going to call my db.update, which is going to go ahead and do all these things. So I'm going to copy and paste this and just modify what I need. So in this case, we want to check if there are any changes. We're using our put as also a patch. We're accepting any amount of changes they want to supply, but if they don't give us a title and they don't give us contents, well then they're not giving us any changes. Need changes. That's not the right error message. Okay. So then I'm going to call my update function, my db.update. And in this case, I need the ID of the post that I intend on updating, and then the object containing the changes that I want to make. So I'm going to give it the ID, and then the object containing my title and or the contents. In the case that one of these is undefined, it will end up undefined inside this object, and SQL will just treat it as though it did not exist. So that is fine. If this is successful, let's see what our response is that we're getting back. So I'm gonna call this updated because I know what it is. And then we'll console log updated, and then if this update fails, we have our catch. We console log the error. We return 500 and error updating post. So now let's try this. I will duplicate my posts. I will put posts. I will put those posts, and I'll put post 1, and I'll modify the title to say test title. So I send this request. Oops, what did I do wrong? Res is not defined. Pardon me? Oh, this is me not being a very smart man. So I wrote this getPost function, which uses the res object, which we have not supplied to it as an argument. So I'm going to go ahead and give it that res argument. And now we can pass that in the couple places that we decided to use it. So it's going to need that res. That's going to need that res. Okay. All right. So now let's send this put request. There we go. That worked. That worked. Our title has been updated. And if we look at our console log at the bottom, we'll see that what we got back from the db.update, this value I've decided to call updated, is 1. And again, same as yesterday, that's the number of items that were updated by the database. Because, again, we're using this where syntax, and this can match any number of things. It can match multiple things. You know, maybe we wanted to update all the things that have no content and put, like, no content inside of there instead of just an empty string. So this returns the number of rows, the number of records, the number of items, the number of posts that got updated. So, oh man, my monitor won't stop wiggling, and that has my webcam on it. So we can use this to perform our conditional logic. So if updated is truthy, if it is a value of 1 or more, then I want to get the post and return that to the user. In the case that nothing was updated, this is where I want to return my 404 and say JSON error post with ID does not exist, or whatever is in the README. And so now, if I try to put a post that doesn't exist, we get our 404. So we have successfully handled all of the error cases in here. All right, any questions on how to do this put? Okay, cool. You know what? I'm just going to do the delete real fast because the delete is mega easy. We'll do our router.delete. We'll put this at /:ID. We'll get our rec and our res. We will get our ID out of rec.params. We will call db.remove. We'll give it the ID. Then this is going to be the same as the updated. Removed will be the number of items that were removed. So we can treat it as our truthy or falsy, 0 or 1. If an error occurs, we'll catch it. We'll console log that error. And we should probably be including messages like, you know, delete here, so we know what route triggered this error, but I'm being lazy. And then, and not the good kind of lazy, and then we will do res.status 500.json error deleting post. In the case that we actually did attempt to remove, we'll check if we did remove things. If we did, then I'm going to send a status code of 204, and then I'm going to use that end because I don't have any data. 204 means successful, no data. You don't need to know anything other than it was a successful deletion. And in the case where nothing was removed, we can return our 404.json error post with ID does not exist. You should also be consistent of whether or not you're using periods in your error messages. Just pick one and stick with it. That'll make it look more professional. Okay, so that's all our CRUD operations on posts, right? Okay, so now we have to do comments. So let's do our GET request first, right? GET request, easiest way to get stuff on the screen. So we perform a GET request on /API/posts/:ID/comments. Now, we could actually do subrouting here in the same way that we used routes in order to define /API/posts. We could do subrouting to handle all of the /API/post/:ID/comments. I'm not going to do that though, because that's a little bit of unnecessary finagling. So I'm going to add a router.get, and we'll put this at /:ID/comments. And here we'll get the request and the response object. And now we want to get all of the comments for our specified post. And we're going to do that with a function they tell us in the README called findPostComments. This accepts the ID of a post, and it returns all of the comments for that specific post. There's another function, findComment, comment singular by ID, where it finds a comment with the specific ID. So this is equivalent to our find by ID that we had for posts, whereas findPostComments is what we want on this GET request. We want to return all of the comments associated with this post. So I'm going to do findPostComments, and I'm going to give it my ID, which I can get from my params. rec.params should be db.findPostComments, and I'm going to give it this ID. I can also rename this to make it a little bit more clear that this is a post ID. Right, this is how we rename things when using object destructuring. We have the key name, colon, and then what we want the variable name to be. So that's what I'm going to do there. I could also rename this slug. I can do it that way too. So let's do that. So we're going to find this, and then we're going to get the comments, and I'm going to send back res.status of 200, and send back the JSON that is the array of comments. In the case that this fails, I have a .then, I need a .catch, get this error, console log, get comments, and the error that was produced, and then I'll send back a 500, and an error message of error getting post comments. Okay. So, let's duplicate this, get post comments, and now we're going to hit posts 1/comments. And there we go. We get all of the comments with the post ID that matches the post that we queried. And let's get the comments for 2. There we go. There we go. Looking pretty good. Let's get the comments for a post that does not exist. We get an empty array, right? In the case that a post doesn't exist, we're not going to find any comments for it. So we get this empty array. So we could do our if statement, right? We could do if comments.length is some positive number, then we return successful. Otherwise, I can return my res.status 404.json error post with ID doesn't exist. Right? This is perfect. Now when I perform this GET request, boom, we get our 404 error. And if we do post 1, oh, this works great. What about post 11? Huh. Let's check and see if post 11 exists. It does. But I just got a 404 telling me that post 11 doesn't exist. And that's because what I'm actually checking is to see if our post has any comments. So in the case that our post doesn't exist, it won't have any comments. But also if no one has commented on our post, it won't have any comments. So that isn't a good metric for us to tell whether or not a post exists. This is going to come down to how you want to design this API. We could use our findById function to check and see if the post exists before we do this comment stuff. And only in the case that the post exists will we go and try to find its comments, and then we can turn successful. In the case the post does not exist, then we can return our 404. I'm gonna ignore it. Actually, what does the README tell us to do? I still feel like ignoring it, but yeah, they want us to handle that case. We could choose to ignore this because ultimately it doesn't matter too much. If they're trying to get the post itself and its specific comments, they're going to get the 404 when trying to get the post. But we cannot use the information purely from this one request to the database for comments to tell us whether or not this exists. So what we can do is we can perform first our db.findById, and we can give it our post ID. And in the case that this is successful, then we can go ahead and we'll have to check if it's successful by destructuring this post here. And I think I'm missing a parenthesis there. And if the post exists, then we can go and we can get the comments, Otherwise, we can return res.status 404 post with ID does not exist. And we would need to put a .catch on here. Get our error message. Console.log. Get comments error. And there we go. In this case, I don't really, it's not consequential where we're doing this .catch. If the error occurs when finding the post or finding the comments from the user's perspective, it's not like they created a thing and we failed while fetching it, and it's important for them to know where exactly in that process the error occurred. So I can remove this .catch because any case where the find comments by ID is unsuccessful, it will throw an error. And what that happens when you say throw is the error kind of shoots up. And it can at any point in its upward trajectory to our console get caught by a catch block. And when that happens, we'll handle the error. So I don't actually have to have one down here if it's going to do the exact same thing that I have up here. And we can use our .then chaining to avoid the, no, we're still going to end up in this exact situation. So we don't want to do .then chaining. I mean, we could. No, let's leave it like this. Let's leave it like this. This is fine. So we're finding our post, checking to see if it exists. In the case that it does exist, we would want to find its comments. Otherwise, we can return this 404. So, do we have any questions here?
Yeah, just some, because you initially had thought that it's not really necessary to check for the ID until you read the README. Because that was my same sentiment when I was doing it. I kind of didn't look at the README. So I just wanted to hear your feelings about that.
So it's not incredibly important to me that we 404 there. You probably should, because like if the post doesn't exist, you should probably let the person know. But this is, you know, in a case where if, you know, you're working with front-end developers who are consuming the API, you can ask them, you know, are they fine with that behavior, because it technically makes the comments request quicker and more efficient because you only have to make one trip to the database instead of two. So you can ask them about that. You know, their use of the API is what should drive your design of the API. So if they're like, actually, yeah, I need that 404 because that will trigger a redirect in certain cases because I know the post won't exist and I try to get the comments before, you know, doing something else, well, you got to have this conversation. I think it's good that it is in the README just for the exercise of using the kind of nested requests here where we first check to see if it exists before we perform this request. And also that we can, you know, bubble up the throw and get caught here. Like, that's pretty neat as well. So it's all personal preference at the end of the day, but I like when the project forces us to think about things we would maybe ignore otherwise. Okay. Let's do, I think all we're missing is the post for the comment. All right, so let's add that. So let's add a router.post, and this will be at :post ID, because I like being a bit more specific in the case where we have two kinds of IDs, comment IDs and post IDs. We can call those the slugs, the params, whatever comes after this, this colon, whatever we want. That's up to us. So now what we're going to do is we are going to try to add a comment to our database. So I'm going to get my post ID out of my rec.params, And I'm also going to get the values that I expect out of the request.body, which is going to be the contents of our post, which I'll have to consult this to tell exactly what those are supposed to be. Okay. Where is this comment? What are you expecting? Please tell me. Oh, it should be here. Okay, so it expects text. It has a post ID. It has these created at and updated at. So the only thing I should be getting out of body is text, right? And we'll talk about that in a second, because I bet some of you are like, wait, what about the post ID? So now I'm going to do db dot, probably insert comment. Yep. Insert comment, and I'm going to give it an object that contains the text, because that's what gets sent along with the body. Then I will retrieve the comment, which, nope, it's going to give me a comment ID. And then I'm just going to res.status for now, 200, send back the comment ID, and we'll also do our catch. We'll get the error. We will console log the error along with post comments error, and we will say res.status 500.json error adding comments. There we go. So let's go ahead and see that this works. So I will duplicate this one. Nope. I will duplicate this one. I will, instead of doing this, I will add post comment. I will perform a post request, and I can send it here. That's fine. I'll add a body. My body is going to contain a key called text, and its value might as well be test. And so I can send this here, and bing, bang, boom, I get a 500 error. But the only thing coming out of body should be text, right? Well, the table in our database also needs a value for the post ID. We're getting our not null constraint failed. The comments.postID needs to be defined. And you could add this to this body. I could add a post ID of 1, and then I could extract the post ID from the request body, and then I could pass it in here. Right, but now it's easy for this post ID to become out of sync with the one I have in the URL. And if it's already in the URL, well, why do I need to add it to the body? So instead, we should be using the URL param that we have. All right, we already have the post ID. And this is the reason why I decided to call it post_ID rather than the more correct JavaScript style of post_I ID. And we can use that just fine right in here, because what this the shape of this data expects is a key called post_ID. So we've named it correctly, and we should be good to go there. Now we're adding the text and the post ID inside of our comment object, and I should be able to send this request. And now it is successful. We get the ID back, and we're going to need to handle this. So I'm going to do the destructuring that I like to do. I'm going to destructure the object that contains the key ID, but I'm going to call its value comment ID just because I don't want to get confused about what ID we're talking about. In this case, then, I have to go and get the comment that we added, and this is where we have find comment by ID. So I can check and see. Well, I don't have to check and see yet. I can perform db.find comment by ID, and then I can give it my comment ID. Then I can perform my .then, and this should give me the comment. It's going to be inside of an array, so I'm going to go ahead and do the destructuring. And now I can send back my successful request and give it the comments. I can also do my conditional stuff. If the comment exists, I think I got some extra M's in there. Then I'll do the successful status. If this does not exist, then I'll do my 404 and say error comment with ID not found. And I'll also need a catch block on the find by ID. So I'll catch, I'll get this error. I want to handle this separately than the outer catch block because it's important to tell the user that creation was successful. I just failed in grabbing that. And then we'll do our res.status of 500. I'm just going to copy this one, save a little bit of typing. Error getting comment. Okay, so there we go. I can post this, we create the comment, we receive it back, and we should be handling all of the edge cases successfully, with the exception of what happens if the text doesn't exist. So I'm going to check if there's no text, right? And we can do other things like and text does not equal an empty string, right? We're not only requiring that text exists, but that it contains stuff. I can also check that, you know, the type of text is equal to string, and there's types of packages out there that will help perform this validation, so you don't have to have these crazy if statements. But we can do things like this if we want. And in the case that our text does not meet this criteria, I can return a status code of 400 and JSON error, you know, comment requires text or whatever. So now, watch, if I make it this empty string, it should get caught. Nope, it didn't get caught. And, oh, this needs to be a not equals. Nope. If not text, oh, we wouldn't have not text here if we're checking it like this. Nope. Oh man, my logic is breaking down. Okay, so if text doesn't equal, or no, this would be if text does equal empty string, and the type of text is not equal to string. No, this would be or. Oh, geez. Oh, excuse me. Apparently my brain has no longer worked. There we go. There we go. Comment requires text. And this should also fire in the case that text does not exist. Yep, because text is going to be undefined, and the type of undefined is not string. So that'll work. Okay, cool. So we've done our validation. We've done our requests. Do we have any questions here? No questions? All right. Well, then I will wrap it up. Thank you all so much for coming, and I will see you tomorrow.